The early morning mist clung to the Blue Ridge Mountains like a soft blanket, its tendrils wrapping around the towering pines that surrounded Andrew Lawson's modest cabin. At 42, Andrew had chosen this remote corner of Asheville, North Carolina, as his sanctuary, though some days it felt more like an exile. The wooden steps of his porch creaked under his weight as he settled into his usual spot, a steaming cup of coffee warming his calloused hands. Beside him, Daisy. His faithful service dog lay alert despite the early hour. Her intelligent brown eyes scanned the tree line with the same intensity she had shown during their days of service together. The German shepherd's presence was both a comfort and a reminder of everything Andrew had left behind. The morning ritual was always the same. Coffee at dawn, followed by their daily walk through the surrounding wilderness. These moments of routine were what Andrew clung to, what kept him anchored when the memories threatened to pull him under. The mountains of Asheville were nothing like the harsh terrains they had navigated during their military service, yet sometimes the shadows between the trees played tricks on his mind. "Ready for our walk, girl?" Andrew's voice was soft, meant only for Daisy's ears. The dog's ears perked up immediately, and she rose with practiced efficiency, though Andrew noticed a slight hesitation in her movement. He dismissed it as the morning stiffness they both seemed to share these days. The trail they followed wound through ancient trees and beside clear mountain streams. The sound of running water and birdsong should have been soothing, but Andrew found himself listening for other sounds, scanning for threats that existed only in his memory. Daisy stayed close, her steady presence a reminder that he wasn't alone in this daily battle with his heightened awareness. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Daisy suddenly stopped, her attention fixed on something in the distance. Andrew felt his muscles tense automatically, years of training kicking in before his conscious mind could process the reaction. But there was no danger here, only a young deer which bounded away at their presence. The moment passed, but it left Andrew thinking about how both he and Daisy still carried their training with them, for better or worse. The military had shaped them both, creating a bond that went beyond the typical relationship between a man and his dog. They had saved each other countless times, in ways that went far beyond the physical. Returning to the cabin, Andrew noticed how Daisy seemed to lag slightly behind, something unusual for her typically vigilant nature. He made a mental note to watch her more closely in the coming days, trying to ignore the knot of worry that began to form in his stomach. Inside, the cabin was sparse but neat, a reflection of his military background. A few photographs hung on the walls, carefully selected to avoid triggering difficult memories. His medals and other military memorabilia remained packed away in a trunk in the corner of his bedroom, gathering dust. Some days, he could almost pretend they belonged to someone else, some other Andrew Lawson who had lived a different life. As he prepared breakfast, Andrew couldn't help but notice how Daisy kept her eyes on him, following his every movement. It was something she had always done, but lately there seemed to be an added intensity to her gaze, as if she were trying to tell him something he wasn't ready to hear. The rest of the morning passed in familiar routine, but Andrew found himself distracted by small details he hadn't noticed before. The way Daisy's muzzle had grown slightly grayer, how she took just a bit longer to rise from her bed, the careful way she navigated the steps to the porch. Time, it seemed, was catching up with both of them, though he had been too focused on his own healing to notice its effect on his faithful companion. Looking out over the misty mountains, Andrew realized that while he had chosen this place as an escape from his past, it had become something else entirely. These mountains, with their ancient wisdom and steadfast presence, were witnessing a different kind of battle now, one fought not with weapons and tactics, but with patience, love, and the quiet determination to heal. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Andrew and Daisy's routine, changes that seemed insignificant at first, but grew more noticeable with each passing day. During their morning walks, Daisy began taking longer breaks, something she had never needed before. Her eyes still held the same alertness, but her body seemed to be telling a different story. On a particularly crisp autumn morning, Andrew sat at his small kitchen table, absently stirring his coffee while watching Daisy through the window. She was lying in her favorite spot on the porch, her head resting on her paws, observing a group of birds fighting over seeds in the yard. In the past, she would have been more interested, perhaps even playfully chasing them away. Now, she seemed content just to watch. The sound of a car approaching pulled Andrew from his thoughts. It was Frank, his elderly neighbor, a Vietnam veteran who lived about a mile down the mountain road. Frank's old pickup truck had become a familiar sight, his visits becoming more frequent since he'd noticed Andrew's solitary existence. "Morning, son," Frank called out as he climbed the porch steps, a paper bag in his hands. "Brought you some of Margaret's apple pie. She insists you're too skinny." He smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. Daisy lifted her head to acknowledge Frank's presence, but didn't rise to greet him as she usually would. Frank noticed. "Everything okay with your girl here?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the special bond between a veteran and their service dog. Andrew hesitated, the worry he'd been trying to ignore finally finding its voice. "And she's been slowing down lately, taking longer to get up, especially in the mornings. I thought maybe it was just the weather changing, but..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Frank settled into one of the porch chairs, his movements careful and measured with age. "You know, my old service dog, Max, started showing similar signs when he got older. It's hard watching them slow down. They've been our strength for so long. It's difficult to accept when they need us to be strong for them." The words hit Andrew harder than he expected. Memories flooded back, Daisy leading him through dangerous territories, alerting him to hidden threats, staying by his side during countless sleepless nights when the echoes of warfare were too loud in his mind. She had always been his anchor, his constant in a world that often felt like it was spinning out of control. "I've noticed she's having trouble with the back steps," Andrew admitted, voicing a concern he'd been keeping to himself. "Sometimes her back legs seem uncertain." The words felt heavy in his mouth, as if speaking them made them more real. Frank nodded thoughtfully, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. "There's a good vet in town, Dr. Sarah Chen. She specializes in working with service dogs. Understands what they mean to folks like us. Might be worth having her take a look at Daisy." Andrew watched as Daisy attempted to stand, noting the slight tremor in her hind legs before she found her balance. The sight made his chest tighten. This was different from facing dangers in the field. Those threats had been external, tangible things they could confront together. This was something else entirely. Later that evening, after Frank had left, Andrew sat on the floor beside Daisy's bed, gently running his hands through her fur. The setting sun painted the cabin's interior in warm golden hues, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. In these quiet moments, he could almost pretend everything was fine, that time wasn't moving forward, bringing changes he wasn't ready to face. Daisy turned her head to look at him, her eyes full of the same unwavering trust she'd always shown. She had never hesitated, never questioned, never failed to be there when he needed her. Andrew realized that now it was his turn to be there for her, whatever that might mean. Reaching for his phone, he found the number for the veterinary clinic Frank had mentioned. As he listened to the ringtone, Daisy rested her head on his knee, a gesture so familiar it made his throat tight with emotion. Whatever was happening, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. Doctor. Sarah Chen's veterinary clinic was a warm, welcoming space that seemed to reflect its owner's personality. Natural light streamed through large windows, and the walls were adorned with photos of dogs and their owners, many wearing military uniforms. Andrew noticed several service dogs among them, their vests and proud bearing instantly recognizable to him. In the examination room, Daisy remained calm as Dr. Chen conducted her examination. Though Andrew could sense his own anxiety building, the veterinarian's gentle but professional demeanor reminded him of the medical officers he'd worked with during his service. People who had seen enough to know when to be direct and when to be gentle with their words. "How long have you noticed the weakness in her back legs?" Dr. Chen asked, carefully manipulating Daisy's joints while observing her reactions. Her hands moved with practiced precision, each touch deliberate and purposeful. "It's been gradual," Andrew replied, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "At first, I thought she was just tired, or maybe it was the weather changing, but these past few weeks..." He paused, watching as Daisy turned to look at him with those trust-filled eyes. "She's been having trouble with the stairs, and sometimes her back legs seem to drag slightly when she walks." Dr. Chen nodded, making notes on her tablet before performing several more tests. She observed Daisy's gait as she walked across the room, paying close attention to the movement of her hind legs. The silence that filled the room during these moments felt heavy with unspoken concerns. "Andrew," Dr. Chen finally said, pulling up a chair to sit at eye level with him. "I've worked with many service dogs over the years, and I've seen this pattern before. Based on the symptoms and examination, I believe Daisy is showing signs of degenerative myelopathy." The technical term hung in the air between them. Andrew had faced countless difficult situations in his military career, but somehow this moment felt more overwhelming than any of them. What exactly does that mean for her? Dr. Chen's expression was compassionate but honest. "It's a progressive condition that affects the spinal cord. It starts with weakness in the hind legs and gradually affects mobility. Think of it like a slow disconnection between the brain's signals and the body's ability to respond to them." Andrew felt his throat tighten. He looked at Daisy, who sat patiently beside him, her presence as steady and reassuring as always, even as they discussed her condition. She had always been the one protecting him, alerting him to dangers, keeping him grounded when his own mind threatened to betray him. The thought of her losing her mobility, her independence, struck him deeply. "Is there a cure?" he asked, though something in Dr. Chen's expression had already told him the answer. "Unfortunately, no," she replied gently. "But there are ways we can manage the condition and keep her comfortable. The progression rate varies from dog to dog, and with proper care and attention, we can help maintain her quality of life for as long as possible." The rest of the appointment passed in a blur of information about supplements, exercise recommendations, and lifestyle modifications. Dr. Chen explained how they could adapt their routine, suggesting shorter walks and swimming as a low-impact exercise option. She demonstrated exercises they could do at home to help maintain Daisy's muscle strength and showed Andrew how to massage her legs to help with circulation. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen placed a hand on Andrew's shoulder. "You know, I've worked with many veterans and their service dogs, and one thing I've learned is that the bond between you is stronger than any physical challenge. Daisy's spirit and determination haven't changed, and neither has her connection to you." In the car ride home, Andrew found himself repeatedly glancing at Daisy in the rearview mirror. She sat in her usual spot, head held high, watching the familiar mountain scenery pass by. To anyone else, she might have looked exactly the same as always. But Andrew now saw the subtle signs he'd been trying to ignore, the slight tremor in her back legs as she jumped into the car, the way she'd taken the clinic steps more carefully than usual. Back at the cabin, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, Andrew sat on the porch steps with Daisy by his side. The diagnosis felt like a weight in his chest, but as Daisy leaned against him, her warm presence as comforting as ever, he made a silent promise. Just as she had never left his side during their darkest moments, he would be there for her every step of this new journey. The weeks following Dr. Chen's diagnosis brought a flurry of changes to Andrew's cabin. Each modification was a testament to his dedication to Daisy's comfort and well-being. He installed non-slip mats on the wooden floors, built gentle ramps over the porch steps, and rearranged furniture to create wider pathways for Daisy to navigate more easily. While setting up a new orthopedic bed in the living room, Andrew found himself unpacking a box he'd kept sealed since moving to Asheville. Inside, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was Daisy's first service dog vest. The fabric was worn at the edges, but the patches and insignia were still clearly visible. Each scratch and worn spot told a story of their time together. "Remember this girl?" he asked softly, holding the vest where Daisy could see it. She perked up, nose twitching as she caught the familiar scent. The vest brought back a flood of memories, their first training sessions together, the way she'd stood so proud and tall when they'd fitted it on her for the first time. One particular memory surfaced strongly. Their first real mission together. They'd been part of a search and rescue operation in rough terrain. Andrew had been nervous, despite his training, but Daisy had shown nothing but confidence. Her unwavering focus and dedication had helped him find his own strength that day. Frank stopped by that afternoon, bringing with him an old photo album. "Found these while cleaning out my garage," he said, settling into a chair. "Thought you might like to see them." The album contained pictures of service dogs throughout different military eras, including several of Frank's old partner, Max. "You know," Frank mused, turning a page carefully, "these dogs, they adapt better than we do sometimes. They don't worry about tomorrow like we do. They just focus on today, on being there for us right now." Andrew nodded, watching as Daisy methodically made her way across the room to lay her head on Frank's knee. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, but her spirit remained unchanged. Frank gently scratched behind her ears, a knowing look in his eyes. That evening, Andrew began a new routine Dr. Chen had suggested. Sitting on the floor beside Daisy's new bed, he carefully massaged her legs and back, paying attention to the muscles that were working harder now to compensate for her condition. As his hands moved in gentle circles, he found himself talking to her, something he'd always done during quiet moments. "Remember that time in training when you wouldn't stop barking at that security camera?" He chuckled softly. "And turned out it was malfunctioning and could have compromised the whole facility. You knew before any of the humans did." Daisy's tail thumped against the bed, her eyes half closed in contentment. The massage sessions became more than just physical therapy. They became a time for reflection and connection. Andrew would share stories from their past, not just the dramatic moments of their service, but the quiet ones too, the long nights when her presence had kept his nightmares at bay, the morning runs that had helped him find his rhythm in civilian life, the countless small moments that had knit their lives together. During one of these sessions, Andrew noticed something he'd overlooked before. While Daisy's back legs might be weakening, her eyes still held the same sharp intelligence, the same devoted attention to his every movement and mood. She was still protecting him, just in a different way now. One morning, as they sat on the porch watching the sunrise, Andrew realized their roles had shifted. Where once she had been his guardian, alert to physical dangers, now she was teaching him something even more valuable: how to face challenges with grace and acceptance. He'd modified their daily walks, making them shorter but more frequent, finding new routes that were easier for Daisy to navigate. They discovered a gentle path that led to a small stream, where Daisy could wade in the shallow water, the cool mountain current helping to ease any discomfort in her legs. These moments, though different from their previous adventures, held their own kind of peace. In the evenings, Andrew began documenting their daily activities in a journal, something Dr. Chen had suggested. He recorded Daisy's progress, her good days and harder ones. but also found himself writing about their shared past. Each entry became a thread, connecting their present challenges to their history together, reminding him that while their journey had changed, the bond between them remained unshakable. The autumn rain had been falling steadily for 3 days, keeping Andrew and Daisy mostly indoors. The forced confinement led Andrew to tackle a task he'd been avoiding, organizing the old trunk in his bedroom. As he sorted through the items, each object seemed to carry the weight of memories he'd carefully packed away. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a faded blue handkerchief, he found something unexpected: a small brass medallion attached to a worn leather cord. His hands trembled slightly as he held it up to the light streaming through the rain-streaked windows. The surface was etched with an intricate design of intertwined paths, a symbol he and his unit had adopted as their unofficial emblem. "Look what I found, girl," he called softly to Daisy, who was resting on her bed nearby. Her ears perked up at his voice, and she lifted her head with interest. The medallion had been their shared talisman during missions, something Andrew had always made sure was secured to Daisy's vest before every deployment. As he ran his thumb over the worn surface, a particular memory surfaced with startling clarity. It was during a crucial mission in a remote area where the terrain had been treacherous and unforgiving. They had been separated from their unit during a sandstorm, visibility reduced to mere feet ahead of them. "You remember that day, don't you?" He spoke quietly, moving to sit beside Daisy's bed. "When you guided us back to safety, even though you could barely see through that storm." He gently placed the medallion in her line of sight. Watching as she sniffed it with recognition, the memory continued to unfold. How Daisy had remained focused despite the chaos, her training and instincts working in perfect harmony. The medallion had gleamed briefly whenever lightning illuminated the sky, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. They had eventually found their way back to their unit, guided by Daisy's unwavering sense of direction and determination. Frank's truck rumbled up the driveway just then, its headlights cutting through the rain. Moments later, he appeared on the porch, shaking water from his jacket. Andrew let him in, the medallion still in his hand. "Well, what do you have there?" Frank asked, noticing the way Andrew was holding the object. His eyes showed immediate understanding, the recognition of something that carried deep meaning. "It was our good luck charm," Andrew explained, passing the medallion to Frank. "Through every mission, every challenge, somehow, it always seemed to give us strength when we needed it most." He watched as Frank examined the medallion carefully, treating it with the reverence of someone who understood its significance. "You know," Frank said, handing it back, "sometimes these things find their way back to us exactly when we need them again." He looked meaningfully at Daisy, who was watching them with alert interest despite her resting position. Andrew understood what Frank meant. The medallion had been a symbol of protection during their military service, but perhaps it could serve a different purpose now. Moving carefully, he knelt beside Daisy and gently fastened the leather cord around her collar. "There," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It looks just right." The brass medallion settled naturally against her fur, catching the warm light from the cabin's lamps. Daisy leaned into his hand, her eyes meeting his with the same trust and devotion she'd always shown. That evening, as the rain continued its gentle rhythm against the roof, Andrew sat at his small desk and began to write. He described the medallion's history in his journal, but also its new meaning, how it now represented not just their past trials, but their current journey together. He wrote about how Daisy had always been more than just a service dog. She had been his guardian, his compass, his unwavering companion through the darkest of times. Now, as they faced this new challenge together, the medallion served as a reminder of their shared strength, their ability to overcome obstacles together. Later, as he prepared for bed, Andrew noticed how Daisy seemed to carry herself with renewed dignity, the medallion gleaming softly at her neck. despite her physical challenges, her spirit remained as strong as ever. The medallion caught the light as she shifted position, and for a moment it seemed to glow with the same hope and determination that had guided them through countless challenges before. That night, as the rain softly pattered against the windows and Daisy slept peacefully nearby, Andrew realized that while they couldn't stop time's progression, they could face it together with the same courage and trust that had carried them through their military service. The medallion was no longer just a reminder of their past. It had become a symbol of their continuing journey, their enduring bond, and their unwavering support for each other. The local Veterans Support Center in Asheville wasn't a place Andrew had ever planned to visit, yet here he was, standing in the parking lot with Frank by his side, watching other veterans coming and going, many accompanied by their own service dogs. The autumn wind rustled through the remaining leaves on the trees as Frank gently encouraged him forward. Sarah, Dr. Chen, mentioned they have a special support group here, Frank explained, holding the door. For veterans with aging service dogs. Thought you might be interested? Daisy walked carefully beside them, the medallion at her neck catching the morning light. Inside, the center was warm and welcoming, with comfortable seating arranged in informal groups. Photos of veterans and their service dogs covered one wall, creating a timeline of service spanning several decades. Andrew noticed that many of the recent photos included older dogs, some with visible signs of aging or disability, but all photographed with dignity and love. Lisa Martinez, the group facilitator and a former military veterinary technician, greeted them warmly. "Welcome to our Wednesday morning group," she said, leading them to a circle of chairs where other veterans were already seated. "We like to think of this as a place where both ends of the leash are understood." As Andrew took his seat, Daisy settling carefully beside him, he observed the others in the circle. There was James, a young Marine veteran whose chocolate lab used a wheeled support for his back legs. Maria, whose German Shepherd was graying but still carried himself with military bearing. Thomas, whose Belgian Malinois wore the same kind of supportive harness Andrew had recently gotten for Daisy. The conversation flowed naturally, each person sharing their experiences, challenges, and small victories. They discussed practical matters, the best types of ramps, therapeutic exercises, dietary supplements, but also the deeper emotional aspects of watching their loyal partners age. It's like watching your best friend, your guardian angel, become vulnerable, Maria shared, her hand resting gently on her dog's head. After all they've done for us, all they've carried us through, suddenly we're the ones who need to be strong for them. Andrew found himself nodding, surprised by how accurately her words captured his own feelings. When it was his turn to speak, the words came easier than he expected. "Sometimes I look at her and still see that young dog who saved my life more times than I can count," he said, feeling Daisy lean against his leg. "But then I realize that she's still saving me, just in different ways now." The group understood immediately. There were nods of recognition, knowing looks exchanged. James shared how his lab had helped him through the darkest times of his PTSD, and now, helping his dog navigate his mobility challenges gave him a sense of purpose he'd been missing. During a break, Lisa approached Andrew with a photo album. "Now we document our journey here," she explained, showing him pictures of dogs and veterans who had been part of the group over the years. "It helps to see that we're not alone in this experience." She pointed out several success stories, dogs who had lived full, happy lives well into their senior years with the right support and care. As the session continued, veterans shared resources and advice. Thomas demonstrated the exercises his physical therapist had taught him for his dog. Maria showed pictures of the indoor mobility course she'd created in her garage for rainy days. The practical support was valuable, but it was the understanding in everyone's eyes that meant the most. Near the end of the session, Lisa brought out a camera. "We like to capture these moments," she explained. "Every dog's journey is unique, but they're all part of our shared story here." The photo she took of Andrew and Daisy would later join the others on the wall, their story becoming part of the center's living history. As they prepared to leave, several group members exchanged contact information. They had created a text group for sharing updates, asking questions, and offering support between meetings. It was a lifeline Andrew hadn't known he needed. On the drive home, Frank glanced over at Andrew. "You know, sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let others help us carry the load," he said quietly. "Daisy taught you that during your service. Maybe she's teaching you again now." Looking in the rearview mirror, Andrew saw Daisy resting peacefully in the back seat, the medallion still gleaming at her neck. The morning had shown him something important, that while their journey might be unique, they weren't walking it alone. The community they'd found understood both the weight of the past and the challenges of the present, offering a support system that honored the special bond between veterans and their service dogs. The idea came to Andrew during one of his early morning sessions with Daisy. As he helped her through her daily exercises, he noticed a notebook on his coffee table filled with all the tips, techniques, and modifications he'd learned over the past few months. What had started as personal notes had grown into a comprehensive guide for caring for an aging service dog. "You know what, girl?" he said to Daisy as she rested after their morning routine. "Maybe we could help others with what we've learned." The medallion at her neck caught the morning light as she looked up at him with those understanding eyes. Later that day, Lisa from the support group called with an unexpected request. A young veteran had recently moved to Asheville with his service dog, who was starting to show signs of aging. "He's struggling, Andrew," Lisa explained. "Would you be willing to meet with him? Share your experience?" The meeting was arranged at a quiet coffee shop near the Veterans Center. Michael Turner arrived with his service dog, a beautiful Belgian Malinois named Rex, who showed subtle signs of muscle weakness, similar to what Daisy had exhibited in the early stages. "I feel lost," Michael admitted, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. "Rex has been my rock through everything. Seeing him struggle now..." He trailed off, emotion thick in his voice. Andrew recognized the same fear and helplessness he'd felt months ago. "When I first noticed Daisy's symptoms," Andrew began, reaching down to stroke her fur, "I thought I had to be strong enough to handle it alone. But I've learned that strength sometimes means knowing when to accept help." He shared his notebook with Michael, showing him the various adaptations and techniques he'd documented. As they talked, other veterans from the support group began dropping by, having heard about the impromptu meeting. Soon, their table had grown into an informal gathering. Each person added their own experiences and suggestions, creating a tapestry of shared wisdom and support. Maria brought pictures of the ramp system she'd designed for her home. Thomas shared his experiences with hydrotherapy. James demonstrated special massage techniques he'd learned from his veterinary rehabilitation specialist. The coffee shop became a temporary sanctuary of understanding and hope. Watching the exchange of information and support, Andrew felt something shift inside him. The isolation he'd carried since leaving the service began to feel less heavy. Here, among people who understood both the challenges of military service and the deep bond with a service dog, he found a new sense of purpose. "You know what we should do?" Lisa suggested, her eyes bright with inspiration. "We could create a proper guide for other veterans facing similar situations, something that combines all our experiences and knowledge." The idea resonated with everyone. Andrew found himself volunteering to coordinate the project, his military training in organization and planning coming naturally to the fore. They decided to include not just practical advice, but also the emotional aspects of the journey, the fears, the adjustments, and the moments of unexpected joy. Over the next few weeks, Andrew's cabin became a gathering point for the project. Veterans would stop by, sharing their stories while Daisy watched from her comfortable bed. Seeming to approve of the activity around her, Frank became a regular fixture, contributing his own experiences and wisdom from years of working with veteran support programs. One evening, as Andrew organized the growing collection of materials, he found himself adding a special section about the emotional bond between veterans and their service dogs. He wrote about the medallion, about how symbols of their service could take on new meaning in this phase of life. He included stories from other veterans about their own special tokens and traditions. The project began to attract attention beyond their immediate group. The local veterinary clinic asked for copies to share with other clients. The Veterans Center planned to include it in their resources. What had started as a personal journey of adaptation was becoming a source of hope and guidance for others. During this time, Andrew noticed something remarkable. While Daisy's physical challenges continued, her spirit seemed brighter. The activity around her, the constant flow of people showing love and respect for service dogs like her, seemed to give her renewed energy. She might move more slowly now, but her presence in the room was as powerful as ever. One afternoon, as he watched her interact with Rex and other service dogs who visited, Andrew realized that Daisy was still serving, still helping others, just in a different way. Through their shared experience and the wisdom they were gathering, she was helping to create a legacy that would support other veterans and their loyal companions for years to come. The mountain autumn was giving way to winter when Andrew received an unexpected email from a military service dog training facility in Colorado. They had somehow gotten hold of the guide he and the group had created, and it had struck a chord with their trainers and staff. They wanted to incorporate elements of it into their program, particularly the sections about preparing handlers for the full journey with their service dogs, from active duty through retirement. "Can you believe this?" Andrew read the email aloud to Daisy, who was curled up in her favorite spot by the fireplace. The medallion at her neck reflected the dancing flames, creating patterns on the cabin walls. "They want us to consult with them on developing a new training module." The request led to a series of video calls with the facility's training team. Andrew found himself sharing not just the practical aspects of caring for an aging service dog, but also the deeper emotional journey he'd experienced. During one call, Daisy lay beside him, her presence adding weight to his words as he described the transformation in their relationship. "It's not just about adapting to physical changes," he explained to the attentive faces on his screen. "It's about honoring the bond you've built together, about understanding that your service dog's dedication doesn't diminish with age. It just takes a different form." The impact of their work became even more apparent when Lisa organized a special event at the Veterans Center. Veterans from neighboring counties came to share their experiences and learn from each other. The small meeting room was filled to capacity, with service dogs of various ages lying patiently beside their handlers. Among the attendees was a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, recently returned from deployment with her service dog, Atlas. She approached Andrew during a break, her eyes bright with emotion. "Your guide found its way to our unit overseas," she said. "It helped me understand that this partnership isn't just for the active duty years, it's a lifetime commitment." As Andrew watched Sarah interact with Atlas, he saw in them a reflection of his younger self with Daisy. The realization that their experience was helping others prepare for their own journeys brought a new dimension to his sense of purpose. The event turned into an impromptu sharing session, with veterans of different generations exchanging stories and advice. Frank, who had become a fixture in these gatherings, shared memories of his service dog Max, his voice carrying years of wisdom and love. The younger veterans listened intently, while those with aging dogs nodded in understanding. During the session, Daisy lay contentedly on her special bed, which Andrew had brought from home. Though her mobility was more limited now, her presence commanded respect. Other service dogs would occasionally approach her, as if seeking approval from a seasoned veteran. She acknowledged each one with gentle dignity. A photographer from the local newspaper came to document the event. When she asked to take a picture of Andrew and Daisy, others insisted that the whole group be included. The resulting photo captured something remarkable, a community brought together by love, understanding, and shared experience. That evening, as snow began to fall outside the center's windows, the group lingered longer than usual. Someone had brought guitar, and soft music filled the room. The atmosphere was one of peaceful camaraderie, a stark contrast to the isolation Andrew had felt when he first moved to Asheville. Looking around the room, Andrew saw how their individual stories had woven together into something larger. There was James, demonstrating gentle mobility exercises to a newcomer. Maria, sharing her expertise in adaptive equipment with a young couple. Thomas, quietly offering encouragement to a veteran struggling with his dog's recent diagnosis. As the evening drew to a close, Lisa pulled Andrew aside. "You know," she said, gesturing to the room full of people and their faithful companions, "this all started because you were willing to share your journey with Daisy. You've helped create something beautiful here." On the drive home, with Daisy secure in the back seat, Andrew reflected on how their personal challenge had transformed into a source of hope for others. The snow fell softly around them, and the medallion caught the glow of passing streetlights, reminding him of all the paths they'd traveled together. Back at the cabin, as he helped Daisy settle into her bed for the night, Andrew realized that their service hadn't ended when they left the military. It had simply evolved. Through sharing their story and helping others, they were still serving, still making a difference, just in a way neither of them could have imagined before. The Veterans Center buzzed with quiet excitement on a crisp winter morning. The space had been transformed for a special ceremony, one that would honor the extraordinary bonds between veterans and their service dogs. Photographs spanning decades lined the walls, telling stories of courage, loyalty, and unwavering companionship. At the center of it all was a new addition to the wall, a beautiful mural depicting service dogs throughout different eras of military history. The artist, a local veteran, had captured the essence of these remarkable partnerships, and in the foreground, unmistakably, were Daisy and Andrew, the medallion clearly visible at her neck. The ceremony was Lisa's idea, inspired by the ripple effect that Andrew and Daisy's story had created. The guide they had helped create was now being used by veterans, organizations across the country. Their experience had touched countless lives, helping others navigate similar journeys with grace and understanding. Today, we celebrate not just the service these dogs provide during active duty, Lisa began, addressing the gathered crowd, but the lasting impact they have on our lives and the wisdom they continue to share even as they age. Her eyes met Andrew's. Filled with understanding, Andrew sat in the front row, Daisy resting beside him on her specialized bed. Though her mobility had become more limited, her eyes remained bright and alert, taking in the familiar faces around her. The medallion at her neck had become a symbol known throughout their community, a testament to enduring loyalty and love. One by one, veterans stood to share their stories. Some spoke of dramatic rescues and battlefield courage. Others of quiet moments where their dogs had been the only thing keeping them anchored to hope. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of understanding they had woven together. Michael, the young veteran Andrew had mentored months ago, spoke about how meeting them had changed his perspective. "When Rex started showing signs of aging, I thought our story was ending," he said, his hand resting on his dog's head. "But Andrew and Daisy showed me it was just entering a new chapter." The ceremony included a special presentation, a bound collection of stories, photographs, and wisdom gathered from their community. The book would be distributed to veteran support centers nationwide, ensuring that future handlers would have guidance and support for their entire journey with their service dogs. During a quiet moment in the proceedings, Frank approached Andrew with something in his hands, a small wooden box he had crafted himself. Inside was a collection of letters from veterans whose lives had been touched by Andrew and Daisy's story. Each letter spoke of hope renewed, of courage found, of wisdom gained. "You two started something important here," Frank said softly, his weathered hands carefully closing the box. "Something that will help others long after today." As Andrew listened to the stories and testimonials, he felt Daisy lean against his leg, her presence as reassuring as ever. Though her body had weakened, her spirit remained undiminished. The love and wisdom she had shared had created a legacy that would continue to guide and inspire others. The ceremony concluded with a surprise announcement. The Veterans Center would be establishing a new program specifically focused on supporting aging service dogs and their handlers. It would be named the Daisy Initiative, ensuring that her legacy of service and love would continue to help others. Later that evening, as snow began to fall outside the center's windows, veterans and their dogs lingered, sharing stories and comfort. Andrew sat quietly with Daisy, watching the interactions around them. Young handlers sought advice from those with more experience, while others offered support to those just beginning to face the challenges of aging service dogs. In that moment, observing the community they had helped build, Andrew realized something profound. The bond between a veteran and their service dog wasn't just about the tasks performed or the dangers faced together. It was about the way these relationships transformed both handler and dog, creating something greater than themselves. As he helped Daisy into the car for the drive home, the snow falling gently around them, Andrew felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their journey had taken an unexpected turn, but in sharing it with others, they had found a new purpose, a new way to serve. The medallion caught the light as they drove through the quiet mountain roads. Its familiar gleam, a reminder of all they had been through together. Though time was changing their path, the essence of their bond, the love, trust, and understanding they shared, remained as strong as ever.